Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Yoma Daf, the Masechta begins by discussing the steps that were taken to ensure that we have a Kohen Gadol ready to do the Avodah on Yom Kippur. Mishnah will discuss 2 steps we took, possibly a 3rd step, and the Gemara will give the sources for each of them and define some of the terms that are involved. Explain why the sources don't apply to other situations that we don't have to ensure that the Kohen is ready to do the Avodah. So the Mishnah begins. The Mishnah says that there were 2 steps that we took for sure, and a 3rd step which is a machlokes about. The 2 we did for sure was we secluded the Kohen for 7 days prior to Yom Kippur in a special room in the Beis HaMikdash called Lishkas Parhedrin. We made him stay there. The Mishnah doesn't say why. It would seem to be in order to make sure that nothing happens to him, but it doesn't say why. Now, a second thing we did was we appointed somebody to replace him in the event that something happens to him, like he became tummy, or he dies, we should have somebody ready to go right afterwards. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says it was the 3rd thing we did is we appointed a replacement for his wife. If his wife were to die, then we wanted to have a replacement for him to have another wife, and the reason is that a Kohen without a wife is puzzled to do the Avodah on Yom Kippur. Part of the Avodah is to atone for himself and for his household. Beiso means his wife, and if he doesn't have a wife, he can't atone for her. Therefore, he's got to have a wife. So Rabbi Yehuda says they appointed another woman to be his wife if his wife were to die suddenly. So the Gemara says that the Mishnah concludes that the Chachamim said that no, we're not worried about people dying. No, we appointed somebody to replace him in case he becomes tamei, but we're not worried about him dying, because if you're worried about people dying, then there's no end to it. Maybe his wife will die, maybe the replacement will die. Once you're worried about people dying, you can appoint 1,000 people to replace in case somebody else. So, therefore, that is not a concern. That's not something they were worried about. Okay, the Gemara now begins. The Gemara says that the same concept of setting someone apart for 7 days before also applies to the paraduma. The Kohen who was planning to do the avoda for the paraduma, to burn it and do the procedure, so they would set him apart so that nothing should happen to him as well. Now he stayed in a special room, a lishka, which was the brisa. The Gemara here is quoting a Mishnah. The Mishnah says they set him apart in a room that it refers to as al pnei habira. The Gemara further on will define bira, and it's in the northeast corner, and the room was called Beis HaEvan, the house of the stone. So the Gemara says, first of all, why was it called house of the stone? The Gemara says the reason is because every kli that was there was either made out of stone or dung or earth, not clay, not fired earthenware, but just earth. And the reason is that these items are all not makabel tumah. Why is this room only filled with kelim and not makabel tumah? The reason is because this was the room that they were planning to prepare the Kohen to do the avoda of the paraduma. And paraduma has a special leniency. That is somebody who was a tful yom. That is somebody who became tamei and went to the mikvah and is now waiting for the sun to set so his tahara is complete. So somebody who's in that middle level of tahara is allowed to do the avodah of the paraduma. Most other avodas in the Beis HaMikdash is not allowed to do. Now the tzedukim and other people started being mizalzel. They started denigrating the level of tahara that you need for the paraduma because it has this leniency that a tful yom, somebody who's partial tahara, is allowed to do this service. So in order to restore the prominence and the importance of the tahara, they made a rule that every kli that's going to be used as far as the paraduma is concerned has to be not able to be makabel tumah. It physically cannot be makabel tumah no matter what's going on with it. Therefore, that would show that there's a special high level of tahara that's required for the paraduma. Therefore, this room where the Kohen stayed, everything that was there had to be something that's not makabel tumah, and that's why it's called the Beis HaEvan, the house of the stones. Okay, now why was it in the northeast corner? The Gemara says, well, it was in the north because the paraduma is called a chatas, and chatas, a regular chatas, also always has to be slaughtered in the northern part of the Azara. It was in the east because the paraduma is brought east of the Azara. It's brought on the Har HaZeisim, and the blood is spritzed towards the eastern entrance to the Azara, and therefore the paraduma itself has a lot of north and east involved, and therefore this room is in the north and east part of the Azara. Now the Gemara says, what's a bira? You called it a bira, what's a bira? This is Machlokes. Rabbi Chana says, name of Rabbi Yochanan, a bira is a special place in Har HaBayis, it's called a bira. And Reish Lakish says the entire Beis HaMikdash, another name for the Beis HaMikdash is bira, like a pasuk in Devrei Hayamim says, where David HaMelech refers to the fact that he set up the preparations to build The Beis Hamikdash says, "V'livnais habira asher achinasi," to build the bira that I prepared. Those were his instructions to Shlomo. So you see, the entire Beis Hamikdash is called a bira. Okay. Now the Gemara wants to know what is the source of this halacha that you set aside a kohen for 7 days previous. So the Gemara gives a pasuk. The Gemara shows that this applies both to paraduma. Like we said, we set aside a kohen who's going to do the paraduma avoda, and it applies to Yom Kippur. What's a pasuk? Pasuk is discussing the preparations to inaugurate the Mishkan. What happened then? Aaron and his sons were set aside. They had to stay in the Mishkan. They were locked up there for 7 days before the Yom HaShmini, before the 8th day when the main avoda happened. That's Shmini of Parshas Shmini. But the 7 days before that, we call it Shivas Yimei Miluim. They were set aside. And then after the pasuk says all that, it discusses the fact that Aaron and his family were set aside, Aaron and the other Kohanim were set aside before the special day. It says that afterwards, it says, that just like you did today, meaning this entire activity of setting aside for 7 days, you should also do lasois lechaper aleichem, to do in order to be mechaper. So the Gemara says it's referring to two other things that should also have this halach of being set aside for 7 days. One is a lasos and one is a lechaper. So lechaper is Yom Kippur, can't be anything else. The Gemara will ask later, maybe it's other things, but for now the Gemara accepts that it's Yom Kippur. The Gemara just says, well, how do you know that lasos is referring to paraduma? You're assuming lechaper is Yom Kippur, lasos is referring to paraduma. Maybe it's all Yom Kippur. So Gemara says, no, because there's another reason to connect this activity of the Shivas Yimei HaMiluim, the inauguration of the Mishkan, is another reason to connect that to Paraduma, and that's because both psukim use the word tziva when we're describing this. It says, Bayom hazet tziva Hashem lasos. It says the word tziva, and describing the paraduma, it says tziva Hashem lemar. It says tziva Hashem commanded this and that. It says the word tziva. Therefore, we connect the two, and we also apply this halacha of setting aside for 7 days, both to paraduma because of tziva and to Yom Kippur. So Gemara says, hold on a second. Yom Kippur also has the word tziva. So the fact that you have the word tziva doesn't tell you that we have to link this to paraduma. It could be just another reason to link it to Yom Kippur. Where do you see the word tziva in Yom Kippur? It says, Vayask asher tziva Hashem, as Moshe says that they did everything that Hashem commanded Moshe. So Moshe says, no, it's a different kind of tziva. That's after they did it. The Torah is telling you they did what he commanded. The pasuk by the Shivas Yimei Miluim and the pasuk by paraduma is both talking about a tziva before, where it's saying that Hashem is commanding this now. That's before the activity was done. Therefore, it's more similar. There's a strong similarity between the Shivas Yimei Miluim and the paraduma, and therefore that's the connection we make. We don't say that this is going for Yom Kippur. So Gemara says, okay, well, if you're learning out of the word tziva, so then maybe I should connect it to all karbanos. How do I know that it's meant to go to a paraduma? Maybe every carbon that's brought, you should say that you have to set aside the Kohen who's going to bring that carbon for 7 days beforehand. Like it says in the pasuk describing karbanos, it uses the word tiva. It says B'yom tzavosos b'nei Yisrael, on the day that of his commanding b'nei Yisrael. So the Gemara answers again, it's not a fair comparison. There it says tzavoso concerning Shivas Yimei. It doesn't say tzavoso. It says tiva. It's not the exact word. Gemara says you need to have the exact word to link things. We have a gzeira shava, a limud connecting two parts of the service of removing bricks from a house that is taras. We have a link between the phrase Vishav HaKohen Uba HaKohen. It's not even the same word. Vishav Uba, those are different words, but you can make Gzeira Shava linking that. Simmer says, yeah, well, that's where you don't have another option. That's where you just link the two. Here you have you're weighing your options. Should I say that the word tziva connects the Shivas Yimei Miluim to Yom Kippur, to karbanos, or to paraduma? So we already said that paraduma is a better link through the word tziva than Yom Kippur. Now karbanos is also a better link because karbanos says tzav also, and paraduma says tziva. It's the exact word. It's not a different word. So Gemara says, okay, good, I understand. But now let's go back to the fact that we said that the word kapara, lechaper, in the pasuk describing Shivas Yimei Miluim, we said that that's a reference that you should do the same thing on Yom Kippur. How do you know? There are other things that are mechaper besides it for Yom Kippur. Every time somebody brings a carbon chatas, it's mechaper. Maybe every time somebody has to bring a carbon chatas, the Kohen who's bringing it should be set aside to have 7 days, just like that by the Shivas Yimei Miluim, before he brings this carbon chatas. So Gemara says, well, how do you know which Kohen it's going to be? They drew lots. Every morning they drew lots to see which Kohen would do which avoda. So you don't know who the Kohen is. How can you set him aside for 7 days? So Gemara says, okay, but each day there was a separate family that served for that day. There were 24 mishmaros, 24 shifts of kohanim. Each one served a week, 2 weeks a year. And then each shift was divided into 6 families, and the 6 families all served each of the 6 weekdays was one family. So set aside the entire family. Let the family lock itself up for 7 days before. It's got to be somebody from their family on the day that the family is meant to serve. So Gemara says, no. The word, we want to connect Shivas Yemei Meluim to Yom Kippur. It's more similar to connect Shivas Yemei Meluim to Yom Kippur than to Karbanos. And the Gemara is going to go through a number of different ways now in which Yom Kippur is more similar. We're going to have a lot of different suggestions as to how we should connect Shivas Yemei Meluim to other things besides Yom Kippur, and each one the Gemara will show a way in which Yom Kippur is more similar to the Shivas Yemei Meluim, and therefore that's what you should connect it to, not something else. So first the Gemara here says the reason is because Yom Kippur is on a set day. It's a set day. Shivas Yemei Meluim was on a set day. Yom Kippur is on a set day, so they're similar. When somebody brings a personal carbon, that's not a set day, and therefore that's not a close comparison. The Gemara says, okay, well, what about Yom Tov? Yom Tov also is a carbon chatas, so that's also mechaper. So connect. You should connect Shivas Yemei Meluim to Yom Tov. You should say that the Kohen is going to bring the carbon chatas, and Yom Tov has to isolate for 7 days before it. The Gemara says, no, Yom Tov is more than once a year. Shivas Yemei Meluim was only once a year. So we'd rather connect it to Yom Kippur, which is only once a year. So the Gemara says, okay, so choose one Yom Tov. There are 3 Yom Tovim a year, but there's only one. Each one only comes once, so connect it to one specific Yom Tov. And then the Gemara says, well, maybe you'll tell me, well, which one am I supposed to connect it? I can't figure out which one, so I can't choose anyone. So the Gemara says, yeah, well, let's see, what should I choose? I choose Chag HaMatzos because it's the first Yom Tov? Maybe I should choose Sukkos because it has the most mitzvahs. It has more mitzvahs than Pesach has. So Gemara says, all right, so I could choose Sukkos, I could choose Pesach, but the truth is that Yom Kippur is still more similar, and the reason is that Yom Kippur is only one day, and Shivas Yemei Meluim was a preparation for the 8th day that was also just a single day. I'd rather compare it to a single day than compare it to something which is not similar because it's 7 days long. Gemara says, okay, well, what about Shmini Atzeres? Shmini Atzeres is only one day. So Gemara says, yeah, well, Shmini Atzeres comes at the end of 7 days that are Kadosh. I don't want to compare it to something that already has 7 days of Kedusha beforehand. It's more similar to compare Shivas Yemei Meluim, the preparation for the Shmini Meluim by isolating for the 7 Shivas Yemei Meluim. It's more similar to compare that to Yom Kippur that doesn't have 7 days of Kedusha beforehand. So Gemara says, well, why does that help? It's Kav Chomer. If you have 1 day of Kedusha, and you got to isolate. Certainly, if you have 7 days of Kedusha, you should isolate. It's building Kedusha throughout each of the 7 days. You should certainly isolate for those days. That makes it more of a reason to say that you should isolate in advance of Shmini Atzeres than of other things. Gemara says, no. You can't make a Kav Chomer. The pasuk which we refer to said, Kasher Asa B'Yoyim Hazeh. Hazeh is like Kozeh. It should be just like this, where we're learning this halacha from the Shivas Yemei Meluim. They have to isolate. To whatever we're learning it to, it's got to be something that you're really exactly the same. And just like this is 1 day without 7 days of Kedusha beforehand, we want to compare it to something which is 1 day without 7 days of Kedusha beforehand, and that's Yom Kippur, not Shmini Atzeres. Don't tell me as far as that it's better. I want it to be the same. Not better and not worse. Now, Rav Ashi gives us another reason we can't use Shmini Atzeres, and he says that it's not possible to say that the Kohanim should isolate in advance of Shmini Atzeres when they're not isolating for the entire Sukkos. Sukkos, we already said, is not a reason to isolate, because that's for 7 days. So you want to say for Sukkos they don't have to isolate themselves in advance, but for Shmini Atzeres, which is a add-on, it's something which is less, it's something which is just part of, it's linked along to the sukkah that comes beforehand, they should isolate for Shmini Atzeres and not for the main thing. You don't isolate for the add-on if you're not going to isolate for the main show. Now, there is an opinion that Shmini Atzeres is not considered part of sukkahs, it's its own Yom Tov. This is the sukkah in Masechta Sukkah. And Gemara says, even according to that opinion, it's only as far as 6 halachos that it's considered to be part of. It's only as far as 6 halachos that it's considered to be different than the Yom Tov of sukkahs. But as far as the fact that you can make up the karbanos of Sukkos on Shemini Atzeres, everybody agrees that in that sense it is considered to be the same Yom Tov. Now, what are the 6 halachos? So the 6 halachos are Payis Man Regel Carbon Shir Bracha. The acronym for that is Pazer Kashev. What are each of these? Payis is that You don't draw lots for which cows go for which karbanos on Shmini Atzeres like you do for the other Yom Tovim of Sukkos. Zman is that you make a separate bracha shechiyanu. It's not covered with the shechiyanu of Sukkos. Regal is that it has a different name. It's not called Chag HaSukkos. Carbon is that it has different karbanos. It doesn't have the same karbanos as Sukkos does. And shear is that it has its own Shir Shel Yom, doesn't have Shir Shel Yom the other time. And Bracha is that in the Bracha of Shemona Esrei, we say a different phrase. We say Yom Hashmini Hazeh, we don't say Yom Chag HaSukkos Hazeh. So you see that as far as these halachos, it may be different, but as far as halachos of Tashlumin, making up Karbanos and Simcha that you missed, you can do it, and therefore it is considered part of the Yom Tov. It is considered subservient to that Yom Tov. It wouldn't make sense, as Rav Ashi, that you can, you have to isolate for that, but not for the Sukkos.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.